To welcome Professor Dame Jocelyn Bell. We've been trying to invite her for some time, and she graciously agreed to come here. Unfortunately, we could not control the weather, even with Jim Simon's intervention. So she arrived on Monday, and we are supposed to have this lecture yesterday, but she was gracious enough to have the lecture in the morning, and also the colloquium that we'll have together with the physics department this afternoon. So you are more than welcome to come to the colloquium as well. And I think that the good thing about Jocelyn is a person that needs no introduction, so I'll just shut up and let her give the presentation. Thank you,
Thank you very much. And thank you all for your interest and your attention, and I hope you don't regret coming. So, women in astrophysics. There's an international body for astronomers, the International Astronomical Union. A bit like IUPAP, which some of you may have heard of for physics and applied physics. And the International Astronomical Union, as well as having country membership, has individual membership. And it publishes its data, actually so far, well, until very recently, just under 2 categories, male and female. So its membership is analysed by country, to gender. And I've been tracking that data for quite a while. I am talking from a UK perspective. I know a little bit about things in this country, but I'm sure I'm not fully up to date, so apologies for any crashing howlers or standing on toes or things like that. And I am only going to talk about gender. I realise there are similar issues to do with race, colour, and possibly also religion in some contexts. And I also recognise that gender is no longer simply binary, but the historic IAU data is simply binary, male or female. And so I'm going to be working quite a lot of the time just with those 2 categories. We'll come back to that in a little bit. I don't know how things are in the USA because I've never been a mother in the USA, but if you're a mother in the UK, there's this kind of advertising. These are word clouds, words used to advertise toys for children. One of them is male and one of them is female children. You can see which is which. It's slightly horrific, isn't it? Shocking. And this is conditioning of children from, as soon as they can sense things, to be honest. In fact, it's even said that mothers handle boy babies more robustly than they handle girl babies. Girl babies are considered more fragile and handled more gently. So some of this gender issue starts very, very early, but is clearly reinforced by toy shops in a slightly shocking way. Now, I'm 80, so I go back a bit. My particular generation was typical of that time and a situation that continued for quite a long time. We were culturally conditioned to be of service to society, which means of service to the menfolk, basically. We put their careers ahead of our careers. Our fulfillment was through our spouses' successes. And when I started high school at, this is now mid-1950s in Northern Ireland, and subsequently in England, for girls' schools, the girls' schools saw their mission as being educating us to be good wives and mothers. Although occasionally you'd find the head teacher saying, of course we're educating you so as you can fulfill your potential. And they apparently saw no conflict between girls fulfilling their potential and girls being educated to be good wives and mothers. And I would say that's a slightly dubious equation, that one. Certainly in the UK, women did not expect to have careers. Your career well, you didn't have a career, you had a job until you hooked a man and got married, and then you stopped work and probably spent the rest of your time running the house, raising children, etc. That's changing, I'm glad to say, and now many generations of women expect to have careers, although they quite often find their careers are rather difficult once they marry. But up till then, they can have careers. So till your early 20s, you can have a career. Yippee. It is changing. It's quite uncomfortable, the change, as I expect it is in many societies, so that's probably not too surprising to you. Now, I did an undergraduate degree in physics. I was the only female in a class of 50. Rather lonely, because none of the guys would work with me. They didn't work with a woman. So you had to solve your own problems. I hope it is better for today's female students in physics. But I guess you're still very much in a minority in a physics class. And that brings some pressure of its own, of course. Not least of which you can't skip class. Because if there's only two of you, and one of you skips class, it's rather obvious. If there's one of you, it's very obvious. But I survived being the only female in a class of 50 in Glasgow. Glasgow's quite a rough city. It was a shipbuilding city. Shipyards went into decline, city went into decline. A lot of poverty. And it was the, quote, tradition in Glasgow at that time that when a woman entered the lecture theatre, all the guys would whistle, stamp, catcall, bang the desks, make as much noise as they possibly could. And if you blushed, they made more noise. I discovered you can control your blushing. I've probably lost the technique, but it was very important that you walked in stony-faced, took your seat, and just ignored the racket going on from all those rather young men. Moving on, staying in university circles, staying in physics departments, I found myself quite often either the only or one of very few women faculty in a physics department. And there are some practices that certainly seem quite common in Britain. I don't know if it's true here, but in Britain they will quite often, the head of department will quite often assign their lone female faculty member the first year physics class to lecture to show we've got some women in the department. Ha ha. It's the largest class, the largest amount of grading, and in Britain we don't have TAs, so the lecturer is doing it all. It's a huge, huge load. And in addition, you're sort of keeping an eye on the new female students, making sure that they're getting on okay, because you want to get more women into physics. I also came to realize that as one of the few women, you're very much encouraged to be present on open days so that the public can see there's some women in physics. On the website, inevitably, you're on show quite a bit. And more recently, of course, certainly in Britain, departments have diversity committees. And they need some women on the diversity committee. So if you're one of the few women, you get that task as well. I've also served as an unofficial tutor to female students. I'm very happy to do so, but it is another job that lands on the lone women. And you probably serve as an advocate for more women. And you certainly serve on interview panels, because when they're interviewing for new faculty or even new postdocs, of course they want to show they're women in the department, so you're on the panel. In Oxford, in engineering, this got to be quite a serious situation because there only are 2 or 3 female faculty in engineering in Oxford, and they were getting seriously overworked, sitting on this panel and that panel and t'other panel, and they went on strike. They said, no more panels. So the department had to train up some female postdocs to serve on panels, which was very good for the female postdocs and probably pretty good for the department as well. But, interesting how some of these things evolve. So why are we so short of female physicists? Particularly in academia, but probably everywhere. Several possible reasons. Not enough starting, not enough staying the course, some that maybe take longer than typical to complete the course. And I think all these are true, in fact. So we've got multi-factor situation. Having been a chair of a department and a dean of a faculty, I've become sympathetic to people who say, yeah, management training is quite important. Many physicists will resist this argument. Of course, I'm perfectly good at interviewing, blah, 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 blah. But actually doing a little bit of management training is quite revealing about one's own behavior, and you learn quite a lot. Bad management occurs, however hard we try. It affects everybody, but I suspect it affects the minority more. And in physics situation, that's the women. And I went to an all-girls school for most of my secondary education. And we were very lucky in our physics teacher. He was very, very old. He'd come out of retirement for a second time to teach us. But he was an extremely good teacher. But physics teaching in high schools is not always terribly good. And again, it seems to affect the girls more than it affects the boys. I guess because the girls are kind of out of role, whereas the boys are in role. I've been quite heavily involved in various plans, attempts in Britain to improve gender balance, improve equality for women, particularly in academia. And I'm going to review what we have done in Britain. I'm aware of some of the things that are going on in the USA, but not all of them. So you might find it interesting to compare what I'm saying with what you know about initiatives to improve gender equity in this country. So the first thing you do, of course, is collect data. How many women, how many men are there? And surprise, surprise, in physics, it shows that women's in a minority. Who would have guessed? But also that the minority gets smaller as you go up the hierarchy, so to speak. It also shows that women progress more slowly than their male colleagues. Now, whether this is because they're less willing to put in slightly speculative applications for promotion or jobs elsewhere, or whether they're just genuinely weaker candidates, is not clear. It's probably both may be true. But it's certainly the case that women advance up the hierarchy slower than their male colleagues, in Britain at least. I don't know the situation here. In Britain, it also showed that women put in fewer applications for grants, for fellowships, for jobs, for anything. Women were less likely to apply.
Fewer per capita?
Yeah, percentage-wise, yes, thank you. Yes, fair point. So, right, clearly we need to fix the women, make them braver, encourage them to put in more job applications, to put in for promotion, to do this, that, and the other. And we instigated special training courses for women to make them braver and help them write really good job applications and promotion applications and so on, to try and address these deficiencies. And it assumed that the problem was with the women, and it was nothing to do with the society in which we are all embedded. And it assumed that the majority was right, and it was the minority that was wrong. Quite a few assumptions in there, needless to say, some of which I've highlighted in red on the slide. And they started providing special funding for women, female-only postdocs in particular. And these came quickly to a rather uncomfortable crunch because some charming gentleman would say, "You only got that fellowship because you're female. You're not up to the standard of the rest of us. You're pulling the standard down in this place. You should leave." And some women did leave. Some stuck it out. So increasingly, those kind of returner fellowships in Britain are now open to men and women. And it's encouraging to see that sometimes when there's a new baby in the family, it's the husband that takes time off to look after the new baby and the wife goes back to work. It's not always the other way round. So they've made these types of funding open for both male and female. However, the funding agencies, bless them, were watching what they were doing, watching the consequences of what they were doing. And they began to realize that giving funding to individual women to help them get up a step or two helped those individual women, but wasn't actually changing society in any way, wasn't changing the ethos in the place. And they began to look for what they call institutional change. What's the ambience like in that department, in that faculty, in that university? Which is a much more subtle thing, but I think it's probably the right way to go. And it should make the place fairer for everybody, not just on gender issues, but maybe also race issues and other kinds of social criteria like that. But the picture for a long time has been the male is the norm, and if women don't conform to the male pattern, the women are deficient. That's been an assumption that's been embedded for a very long time. And actually so well embedded, it's almost been quite hard to see. But it has now been pointed out. For example, some of the programs I've described assume that it's the women who have to change. The way academic society works is fine, thank you very much. If women aren't succeeding, women need to change. Or if some other category isn't succeeding, that category needs to change. But is that fair? Should that minority category do all the conforming to the norm, the majority? I think it's probably not, and I think the way we run science, there needs to be some change because we still have gender minorities. Not always women. In the biological sciences in Britain, it's men who are in the minority. They nevertheless hold the top positions, but it's men who are in the minority. So who should change, assuming we want change at all? It's basically what we're talking about is the climate, the ambience in that particular subject. And this is quite subtle and quite hard to measure and to change. So we begin to look at structures in the workplace. Are the structures discriminating in some way? Is there institutional sexism? Is the sort of norm assumed when people develop employment policies? Is the norm the man with a wife at home to look after the kids kind of arrangement? Is that what's behind people's thinking? Institutional sexism is a phrase we've come to recognize in Britain and begin to understand. Are there subtle biases in recruitment or retention? Like, how many papers you're supposed to have published? Never mind if you're working part-time to look after a child, you should still have published that number of papers, kind of thing. There's also, at least in Britain, a rather limited understanding of what good management is in an academic department. And I've certainly experienced some pretty crass heads of departments in my time. So there are different management styles. You don't have to be bombastic. And there's also what we call unconscious bias. You see the bottom line on that slide? Any comments?
Cross.
Brilliant. Yep. What's wrong with that? To spell it out.
Well, it implies the norm that men have the female sex.
Yeah, it's not in alphabetical order. And it's a form of unconscious bias. I don't know how it is here, but in Britain, every so often I get some kind of survey to fill out, you know, about career and progress and blah, 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 blah. And at some point it'll say what gender or what sex you are. MF. I don't complete those questionnaires. I send it back and saying, I'm not completing your questionnaire because it shows unconscious bias. Wait a few days. Back comes an email from the original sender of the questionnaire. We're desperately keen to be fair. We do this, and the other. We've looked very carefully at our questionnaire. We can't see the unconscious bias. Could you tell us where it is, please? Don't tell them too quickly, because they learn better if they struggle. But that is very, very, very common, at least in Britain. There's a US company called McKinsey's that you may have heard of, who've done quite a lot of work on management styles, and have deduced that the companies that are the most diverse, both in gender and ethnicity, are more successful, more diverse at executive and board level, more flexible and more robust than companies that are less diverse. If that's true in business, I don't see why it should not be true in academia, in research groups, in academic departments. So it's worth paying attention to the experience of minorities. In Britain, in physics, the minority is female. In this country, I think there might be a race dimension as well. But pay attention to what the minorities are saying. They're a bit like the canaries in the coal mine. If they start having trouble, it might say there's something wrong with the ambiance in the place. So minority people may be much more sensitive to how friendly is the place, how supportive is the place, does it feel a good place to work? And lack of success of women in those workplaces might suggest there is an issue. So it's well worth monitoring how many females you have at each level, and is the number shrinking, or are you carrying people through okay? Now, turning to astronomy, there is an international astronomical body, the International Astronomical Union. Your astronomical society, in this case the AAS, will be a member. In my case, it's the Royal Astronomical Society. So the astronomical societies, the leading astronomical societies in each country, will be a member. But the IAU, International Astronomical Union, also has individual membership. It's a bit unusual for these world bodies in that respect. And so, as well as our Royal Astronomical Society being a member, the Royal Astronomical Society can forward the names of individual British astronomers who wish to be in membership, as can the USA, where it's the AAS, as can any country in the world. And the IAU has published data for a good many years on the gender breakdown of their individual membership. Now, they only do two genders, male and female, which we now realize is, and even it realizes, is a bit limited. But it goes back quite a bit, this data, and it's interesting to see how things change from country to country and how things change with time. So this is very recent data. I've restricted the data to countries with more than 200 members so that the root N error is not too large. And I have then tabulated the percentage of that country's membership that is female, and listed them in order of declining number. The world average is 22% female for professional astronomers. in the world. The country that does best is Italy, 31%, France, 26%, Australia, 24%, Spain, 24%, Brazil, 23%. These are all above the world average. Russia, 23%. Netherlands is on the world average. USA is a bit below the world average. UK is dramatically below the world average. And other interesting countries. I'll come back to talk about some of these individuals' countries in a minute. What I'm going to do is go through the years, because I've been watching this data for probably a decade, maybe longer than that. So choose your favorite country and see how it was in previous years. So 3 years back, world average is slightly lower, UK still away down bottom, and USA is a little bit below the world average. Again, Italy, France, Brazil, Spain, quite high up the list. USSR, Russian Federation, quite high up.
What happened to Korea?
It's probably dropped below my threshold of 200.
Oh,
I suspect. It was up there, yes, South Korea. That's a bit odd, actually, I must admit. Maybe I simply lost it, I'm not sure. English-speaking countries don't seem to do very well. USA, Canada, close together, UK rather far below them. Japan at the bottom is not surprising if you know Japanese society. But it seems to me that Southern Europe, Southern Americas actually do quite well. And that's a pattern that seems to persist for a long time. 2018, okay, Southern Europe, Southern America. Russia remains high because it lost so many men in the world wars that the women had to go out to work and they had to provide state nurseries. So a lot of women do go out to work and make use of the state nurseries. English-speaking countries pretty poor. So this is all done on a simple male-female basis. Just recently, the IAU has recognized that maybe that's too crude, simple male-female, so it has now published a long list of genders that it will recognize. I don't know quite what all these mean, to be absolutely honest, and the idea is that you position yourself on a spectrum, which is good, but it also means I can't do this kind of data analysis in future because there's too many options. It's no longer simple binary. Any comments on that list? Sorry?
What is male plus and female plus?
I think it's up to us to make what we make of them, to be honest. I don't think they're providing any definition. Mm-hmm.
Again, males first.
Thank you, sir. You're well trained. Yeah.
It's easy to fill out. It's fine.
Yeah. Why are the males at the top of the list? I yelled at them by email, and they turned the list the other way up. But yeah, it's awfully easy to fall into the trap of male first, female following.
when it's male, female, it's half and half. Now, so we assume that when you're comparing 22% to half when you make a comparison. But now you have to compare what percentages these categories are. Which,
Yeah.
do you have any idea what they are?
It's far too new, to be honest. It only was published in March of this year. And I've not seen, first of all, I don't know how the IAU is going to tabulate this, to be honest, the way they used to. I don't think they've got enough space on their spreadsheet to do each of those categories separately. So I think gender is probably going to disappear from the categories that they publish. It'll be simply country and number of members, I think, that's published, be my guess. Yeah. Besides the question of what the heck does male plus mean or female plus mean, no definitions provided. You're meant to feel where you place yourself on that spectrum without really knowing what you're talking about or what anybody's talking about. We manage somehow, don't we? Yes, we wing it. Yep, so I've already said that's not in alphabetical order. Yeah?
Do you know how representative the membership of IAU is to the professional astronomers in each country? Is it reflective or is it dominated by older career people? Here it's not common to be in the IAU.
Right. I don't think it's terribly common in Britain either. And one of the complications is, in Britain, the body that would put you in membership is the Royal Astronomical Society. The Royal Astronomical Society changed its chief executive a year or two ago. New chief executive didn't know we had to forward names to the IAU. So the British data has not been updated for 18 months. And there must be other instances like that. You know, the responsible person changes and the new person doesn't know they have to do it or don't see it, give it any priority or...
But it's probably heavily weighted towards the older astronomers being in the IAU. Maybe?
It's hard to know. The IAU now has a junior membership.
Okay.
Kind of sort of junior postdoc level kind of person. Some grad students. I think hoping that maybe they'll graduate onto the main list at some point. Again, it's dependent in your case on the AAS.
Yeah, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I didn't even know we could be in the IAU.
Right. So the AAS clearly does it as brilliantly as the Royal Astronomical Society does in Britain. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not sure whether it is dominated by older people, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I've got my slides in a loop. Okay, we've done that. Right. As I've already implied, I think management in academic places is quite important. It seems to affect the women more than it affects the men. Just as I think probably at high school level, poor physics teaching probably makes it harder for the girls than for the boys. But that's my guess. I haven't got data for that. I want to end with an advertisement for a book published by Princeton University Press. It's a series of chapters, each written by a female astronomer, a biographical chapter describing their path through high school, college, to being whatever position in astrophysics they hold now. It's very good reading. I found it extremely interesting. It used to cost about $50. Princeton have now dropped the price, Princeton University Press. It's only $10. And if you're even half interested, I would think you'd find it a very interesting read and well worth the $10. So with that, I'll say thank you very much for your interest and your attention. And there may be time for questions, discussion, comments, furious reaction, whatever. Thank you.
Is that you on the?
Sorry?
Is that you on the sky fighter?
Oh, you mean the parachuter?
Yeah, the parachute.
In one of your slides, you had some.
Oh, right. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, no, it came off the web. I think it's nice to have a little non-scientific stuff in the corner of a slide. It makes it more palatable.
Yes, please.
On individual membership of the IAU, I suspect it probably depends on who the national committee member is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't remember who it was or when, but once I got my PhD, I was advised
Yes.
to join the IAU.
Yeah.
My postdoc advisor.
Yeah, I think me too. Around about that stage. Yeah.
Sebastian?
I'm just wondering whether you feel that the non-binary categorization somewhat complicates the task of making the situation better, because it's much harder to plan an
Yeah.
enormous spectrum.
Yes.
Whereas I think you would want to target the type of experience individuals had early on in their education, which MF does a pretty good job of doing, I think, fixing the problem.
I think that's fair comment, but on the other hand, just the MF categorization makes a number of people feel very uncomfortable. So
Right, yeah.
you win some and you lose some, I think.
You want to facilitate good planning. It might be hard to do.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm Italian, and I was reflecting on Italy actually, like
Yes.
on being so high.
Yeah.
I didn't know, but so I did undergrad in Italy in physics, and something that I felt was very different for me when I moved to the US for my PhD. Because in Italy, like there was like a very the undergrad was really hard, and there was like huge dropout rates and all of that, and they were keeping track of all of that, but they were not keeping track of gender. Like it was almost like I was a student, like how while you were doing, it was not like I was not a female student, like so like you were doing very well, like nobody told me, oh, but you're also a woman. It was like, so it was like, yeah, I was just a physics student. And then I remember I was at Harvard for a PhD. Like first week, there was like, like the older students, like, oh, welcome. Monday night is like women in physics pizza, and I was like, and when is the men? And she looked at me like I was making fun of her, but I was confused because I was like, why we are in the women thing? And from there, like I felt like I started building like this unconscious bias, like women are different. Like I felt like it grew on me also, like I became almost biased against myself. I'm actually a woman doing physics, which I never, like in Italy, it was never a question, like I was just a physics student.
What fraction of your undergraduate class would have been female?
Actually, we were very few, but it wasn't it actually, I don't even remember, actually, that is the point. I remember that we were a minority, because also theoretical physics, so then it was like getting like reduced in number, but the fact that I don't even remember, because I was working with men, like they were just looking, everybody wanted to work with the best students, and the gender didn't matter. Like it never occurred to me until I came to the US, and then so many subtle things. Like I'm working with another student, and the professor was like, "Oh, if she has questions," like, "Wait a second, why you would tell me if I have questions?" Like there were so many subtle things, like one after the other. So the unconscious bias, I feel like, is the biggest problem, and I've experienced it like tremendous, and especially the difference with Italy. So I went on a longer, but it got me thinking.
The Latin countries are pretty high up in the number of in the fractions. I think most of them. I grew up in Spain.
Yeah.
Right.
Where I grew up, I started college in 1972, and still about 25% of the students were females.
Right. Whereas I was the only female in a class of 50 doing honours physics.
I actually think that I agree with you. I did my undergrad in Greece, and we all go into physics, like everyone in the physics department does physics. And I think when we start, we're pretty close to 50-50, maybe we're like 30 or 40 and they're 60. But as you go to harder classes, so for example, when I took group theory my last year, I was the only girl in the class of 30. I don't know where the other women went. I know they were out there. I don't know where they went. And the thing is, I never thought about gender until I came here. But then thinking back my experiences in undergrad, I think that there was a lot of implicit bias that I was not recognizing as such. Like when my I had people tell me like, you got a good grade because this professor just likes girls.
Oh. Whoa.
And I thought this is normal at the time, right? It took me 3 years after finishing undergrad to say, okay, wait a second, like, that was not necessarily true. Like, I worked for it as well, So I think I'm assuming that the Southern European countries are pretty similar in their education systems. So I agree with you. but at the same time, I think we could also do better
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean,
in you know, paying attention
Yeah,
what
to things,
what's
yeah,
said and
yeah.
what people.
Please.
Yeah, I have a comment. So I just reflecting on the non-binary question. So the thing with discrimination is that it's not only the gender discrimination that we are facing, and in fact, what's going on in corporations in the U.S. but also in academia as well is that in order to have more diverse employees, people hire black men and white women. So women of color are the ones who suffer the most because they get discriminated against the most. That's why I think having like more options and like more data on like different options is actually good to see how we can improve as general, not just like, you know, accentuating of female and male. Yes, so that comment number one. Am I allowed to ask blunt questions?
Yes, why not? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, so I think there is an unconscious bias, but then also there is very conscious bias that also leads to like suffering of women of color. And if I may, could I ask, when you made your discovery, why didn't you get the Nobel Prize? Because that was
I think at that point the Nobel Committee had never recognized a grad student. It was always senior faculty who were recognized. It was quite a revolution when a few years later Taylor and Hulse jointly got the Nobel Prize for the binary pulsar and tests of general relativity, because Hulse had been a grad student at that time. And I think possibly some of the furore around my case showed the Nobel Prize Committee that maybe they needed to recognize that grad students also do good science. But I'm guessing. Even female ones, yeah. Yes.
I'm sorry for like but did you feel discriminated against because of your gender?
I remember the day very, very well, if only because early that morning we had a satellite launch, and it was a satellite that I was working with. And satellite went up beautifully, about 8 a.m., 9 a.m. And at noon, somebody came roaring into my office, "Have you heard the news? Have you heard the news?" I thought, oh, the satellite's gone. And it wasn't. It was the announcement of the Nobel Prize. And the guy who came rushing into my office is a bit of what we call a stirrer. I mean, is that something you reckon? Yeah, right. So he was expecting to see me explode. Yeah. But that was the very first time that the Nobel Physics Committee had awarded anything in astronomy. Astronomy had been out with physics up till then. So I knew that was a very important precedent. So, okay.
Thank you so much.
So have you looked at these statistics in astronomy as opposed to the rest of physics?
No, because IUPAP, which is the physics body, does not have individual membership the way the astronomy body does. So there isn't that database, to the best of my knowledge. I would guess, if I had to guess, that the physics figures would reflect the same kind of pattern as astrophysics. Because quite often astrophysics and physics, you know, slightly different, but follow similar tracks. But that's a guess.
From here and from other places I've been at, is the physics numbers are significantly lower.
Yes, agreed. But do you think country by country it followed? You don't know.
Especially for theoretical physics. In France, it's 10% nationally. Much lower than other.
Yeah. So is theoretical physics more macho than?
Very much so.
Aha, right. Yeah.
So I have another question. How do you respond? So you said in your talk that helping individuals. Like if I make a grant, a postdoc position, I say this is only open for women, then this opens a door for the man next to me to tell me, you know what, diversity is good and all, but you got in because you're a girl.
Yeah.
How do you respond to arguments like this? How do you respond to people saying that, yeah, we want diversity, but the diverse people that come in, no matter if they're women, different races, religions, whatever, they are good enough. We're not lowering the standards for them to come in. We're just recognizing that. Like, how do you respond to these questions?
Usually along the lines of it was an open competition. And that's what the panel selected. Nothing to do with me, that's what the panel selected. It's good to shift the blame if you can.
Yes, please.
I want to make a comment about Germany.
Yeah.
I found that your comments about minorities in general, especially women, are they're true there as well. So not just in the UK and the US. The place that I was at was very, very German, so being an English speaker made you a minority, but also as a woman. And I found that I had to mentor a lot of the other female students that were younger than me because we didn't get much attention from our supervisors. A lot of us were left alone to fend for ourselves even. And minority in skin or in ethnicity or just a minority in general, but especially women minorities. There in particular, if you were non-German and if you were a woman. Even people who would say, oh, well, we would like to hire more women, we would like to hire more qualified women, still tended to not pay so much attention to their women students and their, the PhD students all the way down to their bachelor students.
Right. Yeah. I can see it happening, but I'm sorry it's still very much there.
Yes, please.
On grants, a number of years ago, the Space Telescope Science Institute went to double-blind reviewing. And I believe these statistics improved for getting observing proposals accepted for women and minorities.
Yeah. Increasing.
But because they're anonymous.
Right, exactly. That's the point. Once it's
Yes. Yes.
It was a rising tide.
To do it systematically.
Yeah.
It would be nice to do it like in papers, You get papers to referee, and they remove the first page or to the authors. It's a little bit more fair because when you have a famous name, you tend to be more lenient.
You can request that in the Astrophysics journals.
Right. Yeah.
Does it work? I mean, people might know anyway from what the area of research is in some cases.
Yeah.
Might be able to guess. I don't know.
But there's a lot of like examples to prove that there's an unconscious bias in everywhere. Like I think during the COVID times where everything was online, there were some university department, I don't remember what it was. I read the paper and I forgot about it, but it was like they teach an online class that it was all recorded without voice, just with the text and the slides and the explanations. You had a tutor to ask questions through email and everything. And they did 2 copies of the same class, one with a female name for the teacher, the other one with a male name for the teacher. And then they checked the reviews and not reviews, but what did the students think about the course? And they were very, very different. So for the exam same person, just different names. And for one, this professor is too harsh, this professor is not fast enough to reply to my emails, everything. And they could see the bias on students evaluating professors, even though it was the same professor.
It's a good experiment.
Yes.
So there's a lot of different experiments that have shown that when we review things, when we review CVs, when we review a paper that has some kind of bias.
It does, yes.
In orchestra, they've started to do some like behind the wall, interviews.
Yes. With very elaborate precautions. You're interviewing for a position, you're a cello player, and you're interviewing for a position. And you're the judges, there's a screen, and he's kind of MC, and he says, here's the next candidate, and I walk in with my cello. I take off my high heel shoes. You know, and he goes clomp, 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 clomp for me, because he can see who it is, which gender it is. And it makes a huge difference to how many women get recruited to orchestras. So there are all sorts of subtle biases that are almost hardwired in us. I don't think they're actually hardwired, but they're there.
Yeah, there are plenty of them, yeah.
Cheerful note, isn't it?
But also true that, you know, men get more senile quicker. Yes, please.
Yeah, so given that you made the list of things that were attempted, some worked better, or what is the thing in your experience that worked best? If you say like one thing here in the department that we can do, whether it hurts or not. So
Yeah.
what are the things that
I think keep the statistics.
Yeah.
Are you overworking the women faculty because you want a woman on each interview panel, for example? Are you recruiting women and men in the same rate as they apply, for example? So keeping the statistics, I think, is, and then occasionally looking at the statistics. Don't just keep them and file them.
Yes, please. Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry. I didn't feel behind. Do you have any thoughts about how to like make it better for? Because I know you brought up the toys thing, like making it better for younger kids. Because I know when I was a kid, I was in Girl Scouts and I was mad whenever they would push science at me, and I was like, I can do whatever I want. Like, don't tell me that I have to do science because I'm a girl. And it almost made me not want to do it, but I really liked physics, so like I ended up doing it. But like, yeah, and that had the opposite effect, like being encouraging. It was annoying.
When I was a student, physics had a very macho image. I was at an all-girls school, and the other girls were saying, how can you bear to do physics? It's easy, that's why I do it. But yeah, there's a lot of societal things embedded in all our decisions, judgments.
Elima?
Do you want to share your prize that you set up for the universities that are doing the test?
Okay, so I got given a breakthrough prize. This is $3 million. If ever you get given a big prize, you have to think very fast, because as soon as it's announced, there'll be people begging for some of the money for this good cause and that good cause and t'other good cause. So you have to think very fast. Yeah. So I did some very rapid thinking, and I was keen to improve the gender balance in physics, in academic physics in Britain. I talked to my son, who's also a physics professor, and he and his wife, she's a theology professor, were actually a lot of help in helping me shape.
Very similar to some physicists.
Makes for a very interesting household, a theologian and a physicist. So I did some very rapid thinking, and ended up phoning the head of our professional physics body, which here would be APS, I think. So phoning the chief executive and saying, would you like $3 million for a scheme to fund female PhD students? And fortunately for me, the Physics Society in Britain had been thinking a bit about gender balance in physics and were open to the suggestion. So he said yes on the phone, which was fantastic. And they run it. So each year, females who are completing a physics bachelor's degree, honours bachelor's degree, can apply to our Institute of Physics for one of these studentships. And they're awarding 6 or 8 a year, typically. It's been going for a few years, and the first student has graduated. They are not actually all female. It's cast as being for people from underrepresented in physics in Britain groups. And there is one young man, I've forgotten the technical name, but he has severe mental disability, emotional disability, does not want to mix with anybody, but is extremely good at physics. And his advisor, when he was an undergraduate, was prepared to take him on as a PhD student. So we've got one man that I know of, and probably now about 30 females doing PhDs in physics. And a long-suffering committee, which I don't serve on, that selects them.
As they say in Texas, you put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, well, money speaks, doesn't it? Mm.
More questions or comments? Yes, please.
Well, I moved to France in the 70s, and I noticed that there were women mathematicians around, and they weren't taken notice of. I mean, they were just accepted.
Right, okay.
I was surprised, because I'd been at a few universities in the States, and each place a woman was an exception and was kind of noticed. So the first comment is just getting to that change, that phase change, where you don't notice who's a man, who's a woman, etc., is great. The second thing is, rather than worrying about departments and promotions and so on, I think the main problem, even for all genders, like in math, is young kids get discouraged. And young kids get discouraged in math. I mean, all young kids are like mathematicians. I mean, or like scientists almost. They want to know how things work, how big the numbers are, how big space is. They're working all the time. And then they get discouraged from things that have precise answers. And this is where I'm sure a lot of women get discouraged from science. So I think the problem starts around 6 or 7. And that's where some effort should be made.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yes, please.
I'll say, like, piggybacking off of that point, I think if you think about, like, people in science or physics specifically that you really, really look up to, and there's women like you, and you're like, wow, the women who make it in physics or astronomy are really, really exceptional women. But on the other hand, there's probably plenty of men who are comfortable in their positions in physics or astronomy, and they're kind of just like fine at their jobs, right? But as women, I feel like, or as any minorities in gender, ethnicity, whatever, you feel like you have to be the best at what you do to actually use it. So I think that adds a lot of pressure and also makes a lot of people leave academia before they've even had a chance to break through to it.
Because if you fail at somebody, some nice guy will say, trust a woman. Yeah, yes, fair point. Yeah.
Any more questions or comments? Let me just remind you that at 5 we'll have, well, at 4:50 there will be wine and cheese, in case you want to come. And then at 5 there will be a wonderful lecture by Jocelyn again. So I hope I can see your faces again this afternoon. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you indeed.